national spotlight on Oregon voters as the toss-up 5th District could help decide the fate of Congress.
I've beaten Lori Chavez DeRemer not once, but twice, and I'm ready to do it a 3rd time.
State Rep Janelle Bynum looking to take down incumbent Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer, the first Republican to represent the district in decades.
The Democrats did have this seat for over 28 years. I believe I won this seat because people were frustrated.
This is Debate Night in Oregon, the race for the 5th Congressional District.
Two candidates for Congress facing off for the first time on live television from here at the KOIN 6 studios. Thanks for joining us. I'm KOIN 6 Political Director Ken Boddy. I'll be moderating tonight's debate, and I'm joined by Patrick Malee with the Carpenter Media Group, formerly Pamplin Media, and KOIN 6 News anchor Todd Unger. Let's meet our candidates. On the right, Republican incumbent Lori Chavez DeRemer, a first-term Congresswoman and former mayor of Happy Valley. And Democratic challenger Janelle Bynum, a business owner and an Oregon state legislator since 2017. Before we begin, here are the rules for tonight's debate. Questions will come from our panel, Todd and Patrick. Each candidate will get 1 minute for a response. If we decide that there's a need for a follow-up or a rebuttal is needed, each candidate will get 30 seconds for that. At the end of our debate, each candidate will get 1 minute closing statements with no rebuttals. Our first question, we're going to get right into it tonight, comes from KOIN 6 News anchor Todd Unger, and this is for State Representative Janelle Bynum.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you both of you for being here tonight. State Rep Bynum, back in 2020, you supported Measure 110, although you also pushed for a legislative approach. Tell us here tonight, bottom line, was Measure 110 a mistake?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having us tonight. I believe that Oregonians passed Measure 110 overwhelmingly because they wanted a compassionate response to the crisis that they were seeing in their communities. People not having enough mental health supports, not having addiction and drug treatment programs. And so there was a solution that was offered. One of the challenges with that is that it came from out of state. And I believe that if the legislature had worked on that and had taken that up, we might have had a different outcome. What I am really proud of now is that we have taken that feedback. We saw what didn't work. We overturned it. I worked within my caucus to make sure that we were considering things like the number of mental health providers that we were able to have in the state. And I'm also happy to have passed an $80 million bill to grow the number of mental health providers. So I think we're back on the right track.
Congresswoman Chavez DeRemer, your thoughts about Measure 110?
Well, Measure 110 was a failed policy, a failed experiment that people were watching all across the country. People are dead because of that. And while the voters voted on it, they were sold a bill of goods. And they were sold that by their champions and their leaders. And I know that Representative Bynum, she led that way. I know she likes to deny it, but that is just simply not true. And when you talk to the families and you talk to the parents of the failed policies, we're seeing more overdoses in Oregon than we've ever seen. We're seeing people on the streets who are suffering. Yes, we need to address the mental health and the drug addiction crisis, but Measure 110 was a failed policy. Our law enforcement officers were not supported in this issue. They begged for their leaders to step up and be a leader in that. Well, the vote was taken by the people. They were sold a bill of goods by the legislature, and Janelle Bynum was a leader on that.
Representative Bynum, would you like to respond to that?
Well, I'm really proud to have been the only legislator, the only leader to have hosted a town hall before anybody was talking about fentanyl. And we coordinated with law enforcement, with the Clackamas County Sheriff's Department. We coordinated with the local committee on drug reform. We coordinated with Happy Valley. We had that town hall. We talked with teachers. We talked with educators. I led on making sure that Oregon could put fentanyl and the issues that it was having in our community on the map.
Patrick Malee of Carpenter Media, you have question number 2.
Thank you. Mental health issues are commonly cited as root causes for everything ranging from gun violence to homelessness and addiction. In terms of prevalence of illness and access to care, Mental Health America ranks Oregon 47th in the country overall and 49th for youth. What can be done to improve Oregon's situation?
And Representative Bynum, you'll start this answer.
Again, I was very proud to write a letter, an open letter to Governor Brown, raising the issue of the lack of mental health supports in our community, worked with a cross-section of elected leaders as well as leaders in the mental health community, and was able to bring forth House Bill 2949 that allowed for $80 million of mental health investments to be made in this state. It is still a work in progress because I believe that not only did we grow the number of mental health providers, but we were also plugging a hole. We know that we were losing them day by day. They were getting burned out, and I think it's time to invest more. What is really important to remember here is that you have to have a dashboard. I'm an engineer. I love to have numbers. I love to look at progress. We need a dashboard in this state to look at how we're doing on mental health supports and how we can improve continuously.
Congresswoman Chavez DeRemer, mental health.
Yeah, mental health. How we have to address this, we have to triage. We have to understand what is the root cause of the problem. What we find on the streets when you do ride-alongs with Portland Police Bureau, or when you're working with your mental health professionals in your cities and counties, and when you're talking to your county commissioners, what they're experiencing when we're talking about mental health, homeless, drug addiction, it all coincides together. And we have to make sure that we're meeting the patient where they are. I've introduced a bill, the Direct Care Act, because we want to make sure those providers, that we have enough of them. We know there's a labor shortage in healthcare here in Oregon and across the nation. We have to incentivize more providers to want to get into the mental health field. My husband and I, we own mental health clinics as well, where we're treating drug-resistant depression. There are so many young people who are experiencing homelessness, drug addiction, and essentially mental health. If we don't get a hold of that by having more money come back, and that's from the federal government, making sure that we can support our local, state, and county offices, I'm working on that bill, and I look forward to bringing more to the mental health scene.
Todd Unger, you have a question now for Congresswoman Chavez DeRemer.
Yeah, Congresswoman, just to follow up there, you have been a vocal critic of Measure 110 and how Oregon has handled the larger drug crisis. But a lot of these drug users do suffer from mental illness, as you've acknowledged. What specifically have you already done in Congress? I know you mentioned that one bill, but has anything else been done?
Yeah, well, certainly in talking to the local, the FBI agents that we have here on the ground, certainly securing that border. That is one of the issues that they know those drugs are flowing from China through Mexico and right up in here to the state of Oregon. And when you have that open air market, when you're saying I'm accepting of it through a Measure 110, those drug cartels know that they're killing our kids on the streets. When you talk to families and you have seen what the open border has done, we need to secure that border first, because a little fix to Measure 110 that the legislature just did is a step possibly in the right direction, but we're not going to see the full effects of that. 80 cents a pill on the streets for fentanyl. I did a ride-along, you see it, and our Portland Police Bureau is suffering. They don't know how to help these people, and we need to get them the help that they need and the tools that they need.
I need to call time right there. Representative Bynum.
The question?
Yeah, could you repeat the question?
Yeah,
please?
so I was just, when we're talking about Measure 110 and what exactly has been done, on your watch, you just talked a little bit about basically pulling that measure back. Mm-hmm. Why did you feel like that was so necessary?
I have 4 children, and we would go downtown and we would see things that I don't think any parent wants to expose their children to, whether it's someone having a fit of sorts in the streets, someone naked, someone selling drugs to someone who's vulnerable. As a woman of faith, I felt like it was cruel and inhumane to step over our neighbors who are in crisis, and we have to do better. So I think that was an appropriate response.
Now we'll go to a question submitted to us from a viewer. This year, we've seen many threats of incidents of violence at schools, both locally and nationally. Our viewer wants to know what measures should be taken to ensure kids feel safe and are safe at school. And we'll start this with Representative Bynum.
Sure. Again, I see a lot of life through the lens of the experiences that my children have. And one of the things that we've experienced more of is a community of intolerance, of children being able to say and do whatever they want. And I think that that's quite frankly very harmful, especially for children of color. So we've seen both on the east side and the west side and around the state the experiences of children of color have not been elevated to the levels that I think that they should be elevated to. We're seeing racial epithets, we're seeing religious harm. We know that with the October 7th incidents between Israel and Palestine, we saw a decreased sensitivity to the safety of the children in school. So I think that is a real challenge. There's more to come, especially on the drugs and alcohol and firearms issue in schools. But my first priority is to make sure that all children feel safe and welcomed in their communities.
Congresswoman Chavez-DeRemer, school violence.
School violence. Well, certainly I think we have to make sure that the parents are involved, and we have to educate parents on what to expect and what that can look like. I work with Congresswoman Bonamici on a bill to make sure that we're educating kids on the effects of fentanyl and all that. And I know that I come back to that all the time because I'm deeply concerned. But we're talking about school violence that we saw most recently in our colleges and universities with the anti-Semitism. And I had most of the presidents come into my office to ask the questions, what are we doing to protect our students? It's one of the #1 things that I think a president of a college or university or a community college or high school needs to protect their students from the moment they walk in that classroom to the moment that they leave at home. And they were concerned, but they all had agreements with the local law enforcement to make sure that they can protect those students. Yes, we have a right to free speech, but we should never, ever, ever teach hate speech from the time that they're young all the way through. And I want to make sure that we're always focused on that. Our kids are our most precious asset. And if we don't protect them, then what are we doing? This is what we only go around this world one time. Our moms and dads deserve better, and we need to make sure that we're helping them protect their students.
Thank you. Todd, you have the next question.
Yeah, Congresswoman Chavez-DeRemer, you were supportive of the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. You've also said you support a woman's right to choose. So let's go ahead and clear this up. Where do you stand on abortion, and would you support a federal law that upholds access to abortion?
So I think oftentimes this question will always come up because it is so important to so many Americans and certainly to Oregonians. And Oregonians have spoken up. And we know that Oregonians codified in law in 2017 that they want access to abortion. They want access at whatever time that they choose to. And in Oregon, that can happen. Yes, it is post-Dobbs, it is now a states' rights issue. I would not stand for a federal ban. I've spoken out against that. But the Supreme Court has ruled it's now in the hands of the states. We won't listen to this on the House floor. I've talked to leadership. This is not something. I stood up against H.R. 7 when they wanted to have a conversation about it because Oregonians have spoken. I've made it clear. I stood on this stage 2 years ago, and I made a promise to Oregonians. Listen, I'm never pro-choice enough for the left. I'm never pro-life enough for the right, where most Americans are. They have said they want access. I will not break that promise, and I will protect their access to abortion.
But you are against a federal proposal.
Absolutely, a federal ban. Is that what you asked me?
Yes.
A federal ban. Will not stand for a federal ban, will not vote for one.
Ms. Bynum, do you support any limitations at all when it comes to abortion, and would you support a federal law upholding access?
One of my first priorities when getting to Congress will be to pass, to codify Roe. And this is how it plays out. I have a 22-year-old daughter who was deciding where to go to graduate school. She and her friend one was studying for dentistry and one was studying for medical school. And they were very clear in their conversation with one another that they were not going to pick a state where their reproductive rights weren't protected. And this is not a conversation that I had with her, preparing her for any of that. This is what young women around the country are saying. Where I think Representative Chavez-DeRemer fails us is that she promised to uphold Roe, and then yet she has voted 13 times on bills that essentially would pass a national abortion ban. She's also supported the heartbeat bill. And we all know that Republicans' #1 option right now is to make sure that abortion is not available across the country.
Congresswoman Chavez-DeRemer, I would imagine you have a rebuttal to that.
Absolutely. Well, one, that's just an outright lie. There was no vote on any heartbeat bill. So I don't know what she's talking about there. I don't even know what citing of the 13 other votes that she's making reference to. I made a commitment to Oregonians as their representative on this issue that I would not get in the way of the fundamental access that they have here in Oregon. Now that it's a states' rights, it'll be decided by Oregonians. So it's not coming back to the federal level. It's not coming back to the House. We will not have a vote on it. And if anybody changes that, I will speak up just like I did last time to block H.R. 7 with the leadership.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. Patrick, you now have a question for both candidates, and it concerns social media.
Yeah. Many families worry about how social media impacts teen mental health. Recently, 42 attorneys general suggested that the Surgeon General's warning label be used on social media apps. The Kids Online Safety Act is also under consideration in Congress. Would you vote to support that bill?
And we'll have Congresswoman Chavez-DeRemer answer
This
that
has been a topic of, thank you for the question, topic of conversation about protecting our kids. Whether or not, I don't think it's a surprise to most that we see them on their phones all day, every day, and we're wondering what the content is and what the access is that they're receiving every single day and how it is affecting their mental health, whether it's through bullying that they're seeing at school, whether it's they're seeing any sort of information that is not appropriate for their age. And parents want to make sure that they're involved in that. And we're talking about the Kids Online Safety Act. I have not read through the complete bill, so I will say that there is going to be some conversation about privacy and then what we're going to do for our parents. But I want to make sure that we're protecting our kids at all costs, because mental health is going to be the #1 killer of our kids if we cannot get a hold of it. So it's something that's ongoing. I want to make sure I'm listening to all. I know parents are very concerned with that, and we'll listen to our parents on this and see where we can go with that.
Representative Bynum, how would you answer that?
Yeah, this is really interesting for me because my son and I share an iCloud account, so I can see every text that is sent. He, of course, can see every text that I send, so he's pretty politically astute. And I think actually having visibility to what's happening online as a parent allows me to monitor much more closely, and I wish that there were more technological tools available. It is, I think this is a simple issue to manage. This is a matter of pressing on our technology companies to allow parents greater access into what's happening online. It's also an opportunity, I think, for schools now to push back. We're seeing in our local schools these no cell phone zones. And I think that those changes in habits will actually go a lot farther. So parental surveillance, my kid calls it surveillance, but parental monitoring, as well as putting them away during the daytime. I am interested in what the bill will offer. I would need to know more details as well.
Thank you both very much for answering that question. Big topic during this campaign will be immigration. Patrick, you have a question regarding that.
Many Americans cite immigration, and specifically the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border, as one of their top concerns. How should Congress address this issue while remaining true to the country's identity as a place where immigrants are welcome?
Congresswoman Chavez-DeRemer.
Thank you. Certainly, oftentimes, the two issues get conflated when we're talking about immigration reform, and border security. And certainly we need to secure that border based on all the things that we talked about with the overflow of drugs, with illegal immigration coming forward, and we don't know who's in our country. We see the numbers coming across. Millions of people have come across our southern border, and we don't know who they are. We know that there's people on the terror watch list. It's very concerning to all Americans. And so the focus needs to be on the two not being conflated. I've worked on an immigration bill. Sorry, I touched my microphone. I've worked on an immigration bill. The Dignity Act, making sure that there's a pathway to citizenship. That's what our country's built on, and that's what I'm going to do. As a bipartisan member of Congress, one of the most bipartisan members of Congress, I got on that bill as a bipartisan member because of how important it is. So I'll continue that work, making sure that we can get immigration reform, but certainly we need to secure that border so for the safety of our country and as far as national security goes as well.
Representative Bynum.
This is really interesting to hear my opponent talk about immigration and border control, because we had a bipartisan agreement that never made its way to the House. And that is really, really challenging because former President Trump stopped that. And my opponent supports President Trump, rubber stamps his agenda, rubber stamps his ideas. And the chaos that we're seeing in Washington is somewhat a function of his intervening in our national affairs. What I believe is that we need fast, fair, and final hearings for people seeking asylum at our borders. We need border agent funding. and we need a comprehensive solution. It is true, right now we are at a point where something needs to change. I agree with that. But we want to make sure that we're not scapegoating people who, as immigrants, who fuel our nation's economy and provide so much in culture and enrichment to our communities.
Todd, you have a follow-up to this?
Yeah, and I'll start with you, Ms. Bynum. You know, so many Oregon farmers and ranchers in the 5th District depend on migrants for the survival of their operation. What would you say to those operators concerned about an immigration crackdown?
They are always begging to make sure that we have a policy that they can count on. Whenever you have uncertainty, you introduce risk. Whenever you introduce risk, you introduce cost. That is not fair to the farmers who are putting everything on the line to serve our nation's breadbasket, essentially. And so I think this is a very critical issue, and we shouldn't be playing politics with it.
Congresswoman, what would you say to those farmers and ranchers who often do depend on migrant workers and they might be concerned about a crackdown here?
Well, I certainly want to respond to Ms. Bynum's comment earlier about not supporting the border. We voted earlier last year on the strongest border security bill in our nation's history, and that passed the House. And it's over sitting on Senator Schumer's desk, and it has since then. The bill that my opponent is referencing never even came to the House floor. I did not have a chance to vote on it, but what I did do is work with my colleagues across the aisle to come up with the Defending Borders, Defending Democracies Act. Worked with my colleagues across the aisle, which was the framework for the supplemental bill that went to the floor and was voted on and passed to secure borders not only here, give our Border Patrol the tools they need, but as well as our allies, Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific. So as a leader, working across the aisle is important, but that's an outright lie that I did not support a border bill.
And
it's there and it's sitting on Schumer's desk.
I have to call time on that one. Do you have any response to that, Representative Bynum?
I believe that we should have a border agreement, and we don't have it because President Trump intervened, and throwing up your hands and saying, I couldn't vote on it, is not an excuse that we should accept.
Except that that's how we make law. We have to vote. It doesn't come to the floor, we don't vote.
Todd, you have the next
question.
Yeah,
Congresswoman, I just want to circle back to talking specifically about the Oregon farmers and ranchers that rely on migrant workers. What would you say to them that are concerned about an immigration crackdown?
Yeah, certainly they are concerned. But I worked on, again, I'm just really proud of the work we've done on bipartisanship. So I'm on the Ag Committee, and I'm on the subcommittee in talking about H-2A and H-2B visas and how important that is. And we had a bipartisan roundtable where we submitted framework to do just that, to make sure that our farmers and ranchers and producers can be secure in knowing that they will have access to that labor that they need, and Oregon deserves that. And so we'll continue to work on that issue at the same time and alleviate those concerns. Because we know, again, it's important to the economy, it's important to America, and I will continue to work with my partners on that, and I was grateful to be a part of that group.
Thank you very much. Todd, you have another question for both candidates.
Yes, we'll begin with State Rep Bynum. Inflation remains very high. Increasingly, we hear it's tougher and tougher for many Oregonians to afford a home, especially in places that are exploding like Happy Valley, Bend, areas like that. What would you like to do specifically to try and ease the burden for first-time home buyers?
This is near and dear to my heart as we have children that are starting to enter the workforce and you know, hopefully leaving our home. Number one, making sure that there's enough available supply. So when I worked on the CHIPS Act, one of the things, which is investing in Oregon's semiconductor industry, and we invested about $300 million into the semiconductor industry, which will generate about $43 billion in economic activity. One of the questions that was asked was, where are we going to put all these workers? And we know that we need starter homes. We know that we need a whole range of housing for them. What was really interesting is that we found that we had land for housing, but we didn't have the infrastructure for housing. So it's not just enough to say, well, we need financing vehicles for first-time homeowners. We actually need the land, we need the infrastructure, and we need the will to build thousands of houses very rapidly. So increasing supply is the first thing that I would do.
Congresswoman Chavez-DeRemer, how would you answer the question about housing?
Well, as a 10-year legislator, I say the housing policies that Ms. Bynum has put forward have failed, because we are at a crunch and we have no housing. And so to address the land use issues here in Oregon is a statewide issue, and they have not done that. And now people are suffering, whether it's workforce housing, whether it's single family housing, whether it's middle housing. You can put all kinds of programs together, but if you do not do the hard work in making sure that all the other permitting reforms and go along with that, it doesn't work. What I have done is to make sure that we help our young people or families who are looking for housing or workforce housing or businesses, the Choice and Affordable Housing Act, which I sponsored. Also expanding vouchers for rentals, which I have worked for with HUD to do just that. Child tax credits are important for families to make sure that they can afford their rent. And child tax credits for dependents as well. So we have done the work at the federal level, but also to mention bringing $27 million back to the state of Oregon for those infrastructure projects in those small communities who need the help, whether it's wastewater treatment or infrastructure in order to build those homes.
All right. Would you like to rebut?
Sure. I think it's important, number one, to remember that Oregonians value their land. And we can't go tearing up permitting restrictions or permitting legislation just willy-nilly. We see that on the East Coast, when you throw away permitting, you get condos that fall apart. You get land that is not sound enough to protect people. So we see that with hurricanes. So it's not just enough just to throw money at permitting reform. We actually have to have a conversation, and I don't want this to be lost. We must protect our environment, and I think my opponent would throw those rules out the window.
Well, that's absolutely not true. I am very much a proponent of the environment. I am part of the Conservative Climate Caucus, one of the vice chairs, 5 vice chairs, and I'm part of the Climate Solutions Fund, which is a bipartisan group working on our portfolio of energy in order to also protect our environment. We have seen what's happened in our state of Oregon in the West with wildfires burning down. Over 2 million acres burned this cycle. It is not good for our health. It's not safe for our families, and we have to make sure that we're mitigating those issues. The environment is important to all Oregonians and across the country, and it's not something that Democrats can own on their own. I'm glad to always talk about the environment. I sat today with farmers and ranchers and producers in Central Oregon to talk about water, talk about the spotted frog, talk about the Environmental Species Act. All of those need our attention, and I've been doing that work.
And I have to call time right there. Did you have any response to what she had to say?
I would just say this isn't high school. You don't get to join every club and take credit for actually doing any work. We haven't seen any outcomes of that, and it's not a high school club race.
That's it for the first half of our District 5 congressional debate. We're going to go to a quick break right now. We'll be right back after this.